Hello everybody, Adrian Plus here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
So, we are on number
146.
146. And it's been an interesting week, really, hasn't it, this week?
I suppose it has. I mean, in the UK, we've had Mothering Sunday, and that really depends who you are as to whether that's the most wonderful day or it's an incredibly painful day. And I think most churches are seeing it as a very complex issue, really, going from deciding everybody will get a daffodil, nobody will have a daffodil, do we talk about it at all? And it's because something that used to seem quite simple on the surface, the more you look into it, the more complex it becomes.
Do you think we're overthinking it then?
No, actually, I kind of don't, because I think that, we've talked about inclusivity and I think I welcome an awareness that we need to look at some of these things and accept the fact that there's not going to be a simple, nice, comfortable truth.
Yeah. There is a sort of culture of meaningless optimism, isn't there, in the church sometimes, that things must be all right. If you say, we talked last week about pulpy words, but certain notions have got to be good.
Yeah.
And when you say mother, I think most of us tend, and we are very fortunate, we tend to think of a very positive image. And it's true for some. It's a very, very negative image. And I can think of a couple of people we know for whom that one person who used to get very vituperative, if that's the word, about it.
Well, about the fact that she was childless.
Yeah, that's right. And she had her parenting was very poor.
And you have children that are estranged from their parents. You have children that have died. And even when we go right back to we have all been knit together in our mother's womb, sometimes even that is complicated because children are not born all fine, and there's so many things, but at least actually I do feel it's an attempt to say it's not as simple as it looks.
Sensitivity and common sense, as usual, might be
that's right.
the way forward.
I think that's right, but it's been a funny old parallel with the other stuff. Again, we are talking about the UK, and I know we have people who listen to this who don't live in the
world,
UK.
Yeah. The thing about Mothering Sunday is that something that is light and tastes good for some people is dark and tastes bad for others. And I think the thing in the news this week which has really upset people has been the report on the Met.
That's the Metropolitan
Police in London. We won't go into it in detail, but some very, very negative reports on the behaviour of some members of the police force. It makes dreadful reading, actually. We have to be honest, and it does leave a very nasty taste in the mouth. But I think one of the reasons for that is because we know in our hearts that the police force is us. It's not some other alien body that operates independently, but it's not an alien power. It's really uncomfortable to find that we have created something that can go so badly wrong, and it's so difficult to change. And that's true of all cultures that get deeply embedded, so that you hardly notice it.
It's kind of what it is, and that expression, well, it is what it is. I mean, you have to take the rough with the smooth. All those things can become part of your mental mantra, if you like, that, well, it is what it is. It can't really be changed. And that's why I think, again and again in history, it comes as a shock when you think, well, actually, it isn't what it is. It is something that, as you say, has become embedded, but has gone wrong. And I mean, women are not capable of voting. It's all right for teachers to hit children. And then the really big ones, maybe more than that. The whole capital punishment or even slavery, these things have been accepted as as okay, uncomfortable, but it is what it is.
At times in the past, slavery has been supported by reference to the Bible, hasn't it?
Ah, well, yes.
So something that has a very bad taste now was acceptable at one time in certain parts of the world. And I wonder to what extent we say it happens without us really realizing, but I wonder to what extent there are moments when we do actually willfully allow ourselves to be blind to faults or weaknesses that we suspect in people, institutions that they're actually valuable to us. Is it that we just can't handle dealing with the nastier taste that we get when we look at those things?
Oh, it's very interesting, that really, isn't it? I mean, obviously, at every one of those points that I've just thrown out, really, there'll be discomfort, but a feeling that as I say, it is what it is, and it's not our problem. We can't change it, and we kind of don't want to look at it.
I remember reading a very gently and warmly written article in a magazine published in Victorian Times about the problem of race, and describing how certain people of a different racial background actually are not capable of what other people are capable of, and therefore we should be as Christians be generous and understand this. And so I suppose there was some people saying, well, there we are then. And the other day, it was interesting, someone we met had been to some kind of Christian conference, I can't remember where, and there were speakers there. I think there was a different speaker every night. And one of the speakers talked about how she had been involved in demonstrations in London,
right,
against something that was well worth demonstrating against. And it had involved, presumably, facing the police at some point, or at least facing the possibility of the police taking action of some kind. And after the speaker had finished, the person who was telling us about this said they started talking, and they said, well, we don't like the sound of that. We don't like the sound of, people being very strident and loud and talking like that and possibly inviting conflict. That's not what, as Christians, we would expect. Well, the problem with that, of course, is you would have to say to those people, how would you handle an encounter with the person who was the author of our faith, who actually was always doing these things? He defied meaningless Sabbath laws, like the eating the corn, picking the corn and eating it, which may seem nothing now, but then was a big deal, and publicly and very openly healing a man with a withered arm and getting told off by everybody. And I mean, worse than that, he stood strong and he lambasted important public figures. He called them terrible names, and he condemned their treatment of ordinary people.
And he did it all very visibly, as with going on a demonstration. I mean, he didn't sort of just write quiet articles. He was there actually saying it. The interesting thing about that, of course, if you imagine being with Jesus, is your first reaction would be shock and probably horror and an anxiety to be on the right side for a bit. And then the more you thought about it, thinking, well, I'm being given permission to look at these things that were apparently set in stone, absolute truth. And
things that left a very nasty taste in your mouth.
And suddenly thinking, well, actually, I have accepted it is what it is, that people are excluded from the temple because they haven't done some small thing, or because they're very ill, or because they're... And I've allowed that anybody who's different is out, not in. It's interesting, this business of being able to look at something, maybe even after a period of time. And I know we've talked about voices from the past, but I was thinking, Adrian, when I went, as you know, to a Catholic junior school, and some of the things about that have enriched my faith. I mean, one of them being able to go into chapel at any time, and being a very imaginative little girl, I suppose, I loved it all. I loved the colours and the smells and the feeling of otherness in the chapels. So that has never left me. So there were really good things, but there was one moment that I think has taken years for me to really face it. I know which
one you're talking
about.
Well,
all it was that we were in the playground, rushing around like you do in the playground, and a bird fell out of a tree and crashed onto the playground, onto the concrete. And I knew what to do. I ran across the playground to where the nun in charge was standing, in charge of all these girls running around, and I touched her. I ran up to her to tell her that a bird had fallen and what would we do. And I touched her robe, and she swung round.
Her robe?
Her robe.
Yeah.
And she swung round and she said, "Don't you ever touch my robe. Don't you know it's sacred?" And I was terrified and shocked and thought I'd done something really, really wrong. And it took a long time to see that was rubbish. And of course, we've met so many incredible nuns and people who think differently from us in some ways, or have chosen a way that, and they would laugh at that idea. I know,
of course they would.
But it took me a long while to suddenly wake up and think, well, it was rubbish. Of course, her robes weren't sacred, and it must have been almost like that for people being able to think, you're right. It isn't set in stone. It's not automatically right. But then that is never the whole truth, is it, Adrian?
No, it's not. I mean, I'm well aware, or we're well aware, that over our dealings with Christian people from all denominations, actually, over the last few years, that there are things that Jesus apparently said. We won't go into the inerrancy of the Bible at the moment, but things that Jesus apparently said that might or do leave a very unpleasant taste in the mouth. I mean, there's a lot of gnashing of teeth, isn't there?
Is.
Outer
Throwing
darkness
people
and
out, absolutely.
the fate of the sheep which was good and the goats which wasn't.
Yes.
When judgment comes, and one of perhaps the embedded truths, it isn't a truth, is something about gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Now that doesn't mean we have to accept the negative stuff about gnashing of teeth and outer darkness. I mean, it's horrible, some of it, actually.
But neither do we have to accept gentle Jesus, meek and mild.
No, we don't.
Because that was a
Precisely.
set in stone
Yeah.
for us growing up, wasn't it? Those images of Jesus with all the children and the animals and wafting around gently was as much well, it is what it is, but it wasn't what it was.
Yeah, he was tough. He said it the way it was. So what do we do with all this stuff? Because, I mean, the question always is: do we edit out those bits? That doesn't seem a very good idea, or do we make a really muscular attempt to investigate and understand what they might mean and how we ought to absorb the truth that is contained in them. Because, as I was saying about Rowan Williams the other day in his book of poetry, 100 Poems, that he's so keen on looking for truth, not trying to get rid of error or things that you don't like. And there's a clue there, I think. And in fact, I wrote a book some years ago now but it was called Blind Spots in the Bible.
Yes, you did, yes.
And each of the chapters in it was about something that over the years I had either ignored because I didn't notice it.
Yes.
Or ignored because it was too tough for me.
Yes.
Or ignored because it
left a nasty taste
changed
in the mouth.
The taste in my mouth about someone like Jesus, who I wanted to like and love, so.
Well, we did say, if you remember the other week, Adrian, that if there was a Bible without any bits about God that we didn't like, it would be a very skinny book.
Yeah, it would. It would be a small pamphlet. Yes.
It gets smaller the more we think about it.
Well,
Yeah.
Jesus himself said, and we've kind of sat on this chair most of our lives, that when we learn the truth, it will set us free.
Yes,
So
it's difficult though, isn't it? Because
it's
like we
not easy,
started
no,
this one,
no.
we started thinking about Mothering Sunday and how complex the truth is. As soon as you go one way with the truth, there seems to be the other side of that truth. I mean, I think seeing through a glass darkly is one of the biggest problems, isn't
Well,
it?
I'm glad Paul said that.
Yeah, because
it's very encouraging.
it's so
yeah.
easy. When we learn the truth, it will set us free. But what is the truth?
But to just shove it aside and say, well, either he can't have meant that, or it must be something else. Maybe there are the right times where we need to responsibly work with and through stuff that doesn't appeal to our spiritual diet, and we could become richer in the process. And I was trying to think through how that might actually work and help people. And we had an email just recently from a man who had a very bad taste in his mouth, and I'm sure if he's listening he'll know what I'm talking about.
Not about somebody else so much as about himself.
He was talking about himself and how he really tried to be good. It was in connection with looking after somebody else. And it was years of strain and stress and trying to be good. He's not alone, of course. I mean, many people have been through this. So you end up, as I think he did, saying, so where do I go from here? This image of myself gives me a bad taste in my mouth. My image of God's being involved is not very good taste in my mouth. And there are your stock answers, but what did occur to me was that there aren't. I don't think there are answers you can simply dole out like sweets.
No, there are not.
But I do think, because it's happened to me to an extent, that it is possible and we talked about this recently, I think, over phrases like being born again, that it's possible that some of the Christian concepts we thought we really understood need real redeeming and refreshing. Because some of them become stale.
And chucking out sometimes.
Or getting rid of completely,
Yes.
They become stale, and as I was trying to say in that book, I mentioned that they almost become invisible.
Yeah.
And here's an example, for me anyway, this is a personal thing, but this fellow who wrote to me, it might interest him. The George Herbert poem about love, which begins, "Love bade me welcome, but my soul drew back," is really an argument between God, or love as he's called in the poem, and a person who is just trying to continually trying to say, I am no good, don't worry about me, get rid of me.
Yeah.
And the last thing one of the last things he says is, let my shame go where it deserves. So the argument is ended as far as he's concerned. He's not good enough. He doesn't match what is required of him. Although God is saying some really nice things to him, he says, I can't handle it myself. I know who I am. I know the taste of me, and I don't want it. And when as I read that poem, I couldn't count the number of times in the last 3 or 4 months.
And if you haven't come across that poem, it is worth hunting it out, isn't it?
Well
Love
worth
Bade Me
looking at,
Welcome by George Herbert. I'm sure lots of you do know it, but it is just amazing.
The shock came for me after reading it a few times when I read the reply to that, let your shame go where it deserves.
No, let my shame.
Let my shame go where it deserves, right? And he thinks that's it. Just dump me. And the reply from love, and I wish it was with an Irish accent because it would work so well, says, and no, you're not. Who bore the blame? And suddenly I thought, I think I've missed the point that there is a degree of indulgence and willfully walking away from the truth of something that may take the power away from you in one sense, but actually liberates you in another. To find that the concept of resurrection, of life being changed, isn't just a meaningless mantra. It might actually have a life-changing effect and really means something. And this fellow who emailed us, he, over these years, and they were years, he used his really, I think, very responsibly and tried hard his small store of goodness and goodwill to do the right thing. And the point about those words, and know you're not who bore the blame, that the deficit, whether we like it or not, whether we're independent or not, is supplied by the resurrection of Jesus. And we don't really understand, I don't, what this weird, and for some people, rather tasteless truth about being killed and come alive again, all the blood involved in some of the ways people talk about it. But never mind that for now. If it has real force, that is me or this chap or anybody saying, yes, thank you, to the one who appears to have tipped some kind of eternal balance for us. It could open up new worlds, and it might bring about a fresh and very unexpectedly pleasant taste in the mouth. I don't know. I know for me, it's a little surprise. I keep looking round in my head as if to say, is that really true?
Yeah, it is a shock when it, just like we said about the shock for those disciples of looking at something that had just been, it was what it was, and you didn't question it, it just was. To allow something to punch you like that and to be extraordinary. You know, we know the story, as you say, but in those words, and know you not who bore the blame, just so gently. It is, and I'll tell you something I love about that poem, that George Herbert wrestled. He wrestled with the truth about himself, the truth about God, the truth about following, the truth about all those years ago when he lived, and I can't remember the dates when he lived off the top of my head, but it was a long, long time ago, wrestling with those same things.
18th century, I think. Yeah, yes, it was. Yeah, it takes some thinking about. I think for a lot of people, the business of receiving something so big and so helpful is quite difficult.
Do you know, just that moment, Adrian, I remembered, you know, when they came down from the mountain and they couldn't cast the demon out of that boy, if you remember, and Jesus said, this one will only it'll only be through prayer. Am I praying for the Metropolitan Police? Am I praying that something radical, not just a change in law, but a change in the very centre of it? Because maybe that would take a miracle. Yeah. Are we praying against and for the middle of
and also
situations?
Maybe there's something brilliant in the middle of the Metropolitan Police that can move outwards and change the rest of it.
Especially if it gains the confidence of being shocked into looking at it and saying, I can't be part of this anymore. Yeah.
And we shall see.
Indeed.
Many questions there.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.